All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Generation 180's Electrify Your Ride event series virtual event, Women Leading Transportation Electrification. If you're here to join us to listen about women supporting the transition to electric vehicles, then you're in the right place. Today, we're looking forward to hearing from three industry experts, Liza Bortis, President and CEO of CMA Automotive, Jane Akumu, Program Manager with the United Nations Environment Program, and Britta Gross, Managing Director for Mobility at RMI. These three industry leaders are leading the charge to electrify transportation in Virginia, across the United States, and internationally. But before we get started, I want to tell you briefly about Generation 180. Generation 180 is a national nonprofit organization based in Charlottesville, Virginia. We work to inspire and equip individuals to take action on clean energy. My name is Stuart Gardner, and I'm joined by my colleague Blair St. Ledger Olson, and a special thanks to our team member working behind the scenes to help support this event. Here's a quick look at our three major focus areas of work. We're working to flip the energy script, helping us move from a narrative focused on climate doom and gloom to a story focused on where we need to go, a world powered by 100% clean energy, a story that says we can do this and we all have a role to play. We focus on individuals in their homes and their communities because your energy matters. Certain behaviors and technologies not only help fight climate change, but they also help to build the social momentum and political will we need to get big system level changes. We lead with two major nationwide campaigns, Solar for All Schools and Electrify Your Ride, which works to make EVs more accessible. Solar and EVs are clean energy solutions proven to address two of the largest sources of carbon dioxide, emissions from electricity generation and transportation. Okay, so a few quick housekeeping items before we dive in. Because of the number of attendees joining us today, all attendees will remain on mute throughout the event. Please use the Q&A and not the chat to submit your questions. We'll get to as many of them as we can during the next hour. So without further ado, let's hear from our guests. Liza, do you want to kick us off and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much, Stuart. As I was reading through the three focus areas that you just shared, all are very relevant to our company and to I know what we're going to talk about today, and I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. So I'm Liza Bortis. I'm the president and CEO of Carter Myers Automotive. We are located in Virginia, near where Gen 180's headquarters are. We do have dealerships across the state of Virginia. We represent 17 different franchises here in the United States. We have about 700 associates across Virginia. We are a family and employee-owned company. We're an ESOP as well. And I'm fortunate enough to be the fourth generation of my family to have the honor and privilege of running CMA and leading CMA. A couple of key things I'll just mention that I think will be relevant as we go through. We have made a commitment not only to sustainability, but specifically to solar and to vehicle electrification. We have the first ever in Virginia, the first fully solar dealership, first powered by the sun here in Charlottesville. And since then, we have added solar to multiple other dealerships here in Virginia as well. We've had the privilege of working with Gen 180 as well as the Virginia Auto Dealers Association to move legislation forward that was extremely impactful this year in the state of Virginia to be able to put more EVs on the road in our future. And finally, I'll just share that I do participate and am a part of the national product committees for several of our manufacturers, including Volvo and Nissan, who have both made a strong commitment to electrification.
Awesome, thanks, Liza. Jane, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Stuart. Yes, I'm Jane Akumu. I work for the United Nations Environment Program, and this is the environmental arm of the UN. You know, our objective is to provide transport solutions to both low and middle income countries to address both air pollution for local benefits and climate change mitigation, of course, for global benefits. I coordinate Africa activities. Why Africa? Africa, especially the Sub-Saharan Africa sub-region, is one of the fastest urbanizing regions in the world. Of course, that results into rapid vehicle growth. When you look at the absolute numbers, we're still talking about very low numbers compared to, for example, the US. But what we see is that in many of the countries, the vehicle growth is actually doubling in less than 10 years in many of these countries, What kind of vehicles are being imported? Highly pollutive vehicles, because most of the countries lack minimum standards to incentivize cleaner vehicles, including electric vehicles. So this is an exciting time for us to work on this topic, electric mobility in Africa, because it's still at its infancy. For example, UNEP's global headquarters is here in Nairobi, Kenya. That's where I am joining from. And the electric vehicles represent about 0.02% of the total fleet. Yesterday and a part of today, I've been in virtual workshops with Mali on promoting cleaner and more fuel-efficient vehicles. And they don't even have one electric car. So
wow.
I think it's important that even as developed countries move towards increasing their share of electric mobility or even switching fully to electric mobility in the coming years, that the rest of the world, the low and middle income countries where the bulk of the vehicle growth is actually taking place, they are not left behind. Why is it this exciting for me to work in Africa? As I mentioned, the countries still have very low vehicle population. Hence, we can influence the future. Hence, we can include women in electric mobility. In some of the countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, 100% of their electricity is from renewable energies. So, it makes sense to promote electric mobility. And then, of course, many of the countries rely on used vehicles, imports. In Kenya, 95%. In Nigeria, over 85% of their vehicles are actually imported as used vehicles. Hence, they can actually import used vehicles more cheaply, but the need for incentives, the need for standards, so that countries can import good quality used vehicles. Thank you.
That's great, Jane. Thank you. Britta, do you want to round us out, introduce yourself?
You bet. Thank you. And wow, what a group of panelists here to be among. I'm just fascinated to hear what they have to say, actually. I'm Britta Gross. Again, it is a real pleasure to be here. I'm the managing director. I lead the mobility program at RMI. It's a think tank, but we get very involved in projects on the ground. We're mostly active in North America, India, and in China, but we also have very large programs in the developing parts of the world, across Africa, Southeast Asia, and in the Caribbean, in the island areas here around the United States. Our goal is really focused on 2030 and the carbon reductions we have to make. We have long been known for 40 years of our history. We've been known for energy efficiency and driving renewables into the market, finding cost-effective and market-driven solutions so that it doesn't have to be done forever on the backs of government, that we find a way for the private market to play a role, and a big role, to getting to scale. And but for the last year, we've been really sort of turned this corner to focus not just on energy and how it's used, but also in getting all parts of carbon out of that system. And so I do lead the mobility program, where our goal is by 2030 to reduce carbon emissions by about a half in the transportation sector in the countries where we do operate, which are really the leading countries for emissions overall, but also in transportation. In fact, transportation in the United States is the #1 cause of carbon emissions in the United States. So it's an important sector. In the end, we have to get about 70 million electric cars on the road. That's about 1 in 4 of us. That's going to be my big talking point that I return to over and over again today, to make sure that we all sort of understand our personal role in the kind of cars we choose to drive, taking us to the store, to the schools, to on vacation as well. So 1 in 4 of us need to be in electric cars, trucks 1 in 7, buses about 1 in 3. So it's just really important that we start to look at the world in a different way. It's not just transportation, it's what kind of transportation, and it's transportation that actually drives more equity, right? We're not polluting in areas where people are just constantly disadvantaged and exposed to many more tailpipe emissions than otherwise. My background, I come out of industry. I spent about 15 years or so in aerospace, and then moved into automotive, where I spent about 20 years working on advanced clean tech solutions, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, and also battery electric vehicles. And my job was very outward facing. So it was not how is the car built, but what does it take to grow the market for these vehicles? What kind of policies, infrastructure, where's the energy going to come from? Who could you partner with? How much infrastructure do we need? And et cetera. So sort of everything in that ecosystem around the vehicles. And when I talk about vehicles, 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, cars, pickup trucks, medium duty, heavy duties, and the buses. So it's the whole spectrum of everything we use on the roads today. So pleasure to be here. Look forward to the questions.
That's great. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're really honored to have such an amazing group of panelists with us today and joining us from quite literally all over the globe. I want to start with a kind of level set, get each of your perspectives, and Britta will actually start with you this time. But I'd love to hear about what each of your experiences with electric vehicles outside of work. So how are EVs a part of your life, or how would you like them to be a part of your life? And Britta, do you want to start?
Sure. So, I mean, it's easy for me, right? I've been in the industry for 20 years. I know how these vehicles were over-designed. They are very safe. They are completely, you know, they're much more value than what you pay for them at the dealership today. They are just they're sold at prices that the automakers cannot make money on. That's going to get better. The cost of batteries is significantly coming down and will continue to come down. But I'm lucky enough and fortunate enough to have 3 in the driveway. I and my 2 daughters all drive Chevy Volts. Those are plug-in hybrid vehicles. We almost never fuel with gasoline. On a long trip, we may once a year or so have to top off the gas engine. But for all practical purposes, every single day we're in an electric vehicle. And answering questions when I see another electric vehicle on the road or at the grocery store, I always chat and talk with them, sort of beef up that camaraderie and how you doing? Do you like your car? How's it performing? So just try to spread that word and answer any questions whenever I'm asked. So that's what it means to me in my private life.
That's great. I will say when I became an EV owner, I think I noticed EVs more as an EV owner and may or may not have almost followed one day just so I could figure out who owned one. Jane, what about you?
For me, my task is actually to make EVs, in many of the African countries, they see the EV as a technology for the future. When you're trying to discuss, it's already here. They see it as a technology of the future. So how do we bring it into a technology of today? And I'm glad that Britta talked about the full spectrum of EVs, because one of the ways we are finding it a bit easier to, get a foothold in the countries is through the 2 and 3-wheelers. Because already, they are cost effective. Mm-hmm. Charging is not a big problem because, that's also another challenge. And then also we see a lot of women. We've just finished a research on, EV and women in Kenya. So we're just compiling the report. And we found that a lot of the women actually in the 2-3-wheeler business, they own the business. They also, they have a place to participate in the battery swapping, in the charging. There are areas or niches that the women can play a role. So that's what I'm excited and really would want to encourage in Africa to make it a reality in a lot of the countries, not just, yes, we see, for example, in Kenya, which is one of the leading, very few African countries are leading, Kenya, Rwanda. But for Kenya, again, it's mainly for public transport. We have an Uber-like, fully electric mobility, company. And of course, as I said, the 2-3-wheeler business. Thank you.
It's really, really interesting about the 2 and 3-wheelers and how women are playing a role. Really look forward to seeing that research. Liza, do you want to close us out?
Sure. It's hard to separate your personal and your professional life completely, but I guess on my personal side, my whole family drives EVs. I have a Volvo plug-in hybrid. My husband drives a Nissan Leaf. My 15-year-old son is about to get his driver's license. He will also drive an electric vehicle. It's between the Chevy Bolt or the Nissan Leaf. That's his choice. That's his only choices if he wants us to participate in the expense of a vehicle. We also have 2 electric bikes. As you talk about 2 wheels, we try to use them around town as much as possible. If we're heading out to dinner, we'll be like, let's jump on our bike. Even though Charlottesville is very hilly, it gives us that option. So it is fully a part of our home life. The only other thing I'll mention is we work with a lot of nonprofits, and we've tried to figure out how we can also weave our commitment to electrification in with our commitment to our nonprofit. So we work with C3, which is a local nonprofit, and trying to help them be able to have access to vehicles that they could put other community leaders in, just to help create awareness. And we do a lot on social media around that space, on my personal social media page, answering questions about the journey and how can we help create the awareness.
That's great. Thank you. Here's another question for everyone. How has transportation electrification been part of your career? Was there something that necessarily drew you into working with electric vehicles? Can you kind of take us on that journey a little bit, how you are where you are today? Britta, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So I guess I remember being in aerospace, and I loved aerospace, really clean science, very, I go back to the 80s in my career, and it was a place where there were a lot of women working, just a really exciting career, working with NASA on different kinds of space station programs and so on. But I did have a feeling that I wasn't close enough connected, and government programs where I couldn't talk about them. And I had this feeling that I felt like I'd like to be closer to people, like closer to products that people could touch, that number one, I could talk about, but also might influence everyone's day-to-day life, not a satellite in the sky that you sort of don't even know how that operates. And so I was sort of seeking for something like that. And I happened to speak German, learned it through school. And an opportunity came up through a General Motors Hughes Aerospace relationship to go to Germany if you spoke German and do system engineering. And it was sort of this interface job between aerospace and automotive. And so it's like, again, another hint for everyone, just you never know when an extra language, an extra skill, an interest in a certain area just becomes that little spark that gets you somewhere where you couldn't possibly plan it. And that led into automotive. And then when I got in automotive and had a choice to come back to either Michigan or go back to aerospace in California, I just thought, if I can get into the advanced vehicle technologies, because it's a guy's world in the sort of truck area and in the bigger engine development stuff. There were women all over the hydrogen program and the battery vehicle program over time. And I just said, it's a welcoming, it's hard to do, it's a welcoming environment, hard to do, really challenging one-off problems have never been solved before. That's for me. I love those system engineering problems. So that was my journey into automotive, and I couldn't have planned it. It just kind of happened. But if you seek out those kinds of environments, you find them.
Love that. Jane, how about you? How did you find yourself working in electric mobility?
For me, it's more of I would say a transition, because when I joined, of course, I was working before in government in Kenya. And then I joined UNEP in 2004. And it was to work on clean fuels and clean vehicles, more of the conventional, fuels, because Africa was still using lead in petrol, very high sulfur levels in fuel. So pollution was a big, problem. So that's how I started, I started out. And then over the years, in 2009, we started a new program with a few of our partners to look at how to promote cleaner and more efficient vehicles, which also includes electric mobility. But that was like, at the very end, how do we progressively move to electric mobility? But I would say, significantly in 2018, we had an Africa Mobility Week, which we coordinated. We brought together about 42 African countries, and we had a full session on electric mobility. And it was really an eye-opener for almost, all the participants who were there, really, from all over the, the continent, with some international, colleagues also participating. And for a lot of the people who came, because we also had like an exhibition for electric, people, I think there were only 2 electric cars within the compound. So, and we looked around who has an electric car, brought it in the compound. And for a lot of the people who attended that meeting, it was the first time to actually see. For some, it was the first time to even, be ridden around in an electric car. And from that, we've seen a lot of interest. in electric mobility, countries willing to move to, towards this, embracing this. So last year we did start an electric mobility program. So it is that recent. So that's what we are now working on. How do we, support this in a more holistic manner, coming up with a regional platform where we can share experiences, trainings and such. So that's how I got, to transition into electric mobility.
Love that. Liza, how about you? You're a real strong voice in the community around electric vehicles. How did you find your way there?
It was a pretty clear moment. Years ago, my husband and I had started really educating ourselves around the topic of climate change, and an area that I have to be very honest, I had heard obviously a lot about it, but I can't tell you I was committed to it. And as we started studying, we had a moment where we had to look at each other and say, okay, we're in the transportation business. As Britta shared, in the US, transportation and private vehicles, I think, is the largest contributor to emissions in our country. And we said, okay, we sell a lot of cars. We can either put our head in the sand and be a part of the problem and keep selling thousands and thousands of cars, or we can use our position in the transportation industry to be a part of the solution and start educating ourselves. And so I consciously got on a couple of the national product committees with the manufacturers we represent. We needed to have a voice to continue to encourage them and push them to figure out how to bring not only electric vehicles into the United States, but how to do it profitably and how to market them in a way that we're going to actually get them on the roads. So for me, Stuart, I've been in the transportation business for a long time, but it was a clear moment where I said, you know what, I'm either going to be a part of the problem or I'm going to be a part of the solution.
It's wonderful.
That's great. And Liza, we're going to start with you for this next question, not to put you right back on the spot, but I think it'll be a natural segue. So I can say, at least from my own personal experience, my impression of EVs have definitely changed over time. I have gone from being 10 years ago plagued by the myth that they're still charged by coal and not any cleaner. And I say that as an environmental scientist. I'm reformed now. I know that's not the case. And changing those perspectives, those impressions of EVs is a lot of what Gen 180 does. So I'm interested in hearing all of your stories about how your impression of EVs has changed over time. So Liza, we'll start with you.
I remember we talk about the history of our company every month in our new hire orientation. And I share stories from my great-grandfather and grandfather and things that have been passed down. And when we started in the early 1900s, we started with electric vehicles. I mean, that's where our industry began. And we actually manufactured a couple trucks in the back of our hardware store. Well, quickly that changed from electric into gasoline powered vehicles. And I always think back to how different would our country look if that pivot hadn't happened in the early 1900s. As far as how they've changed, I would agree with you. I was not very knowledgeable about the few EVs that we had to sell, a decade ago. One of the first ones I drove was a Honda Insight back in the late 90s. And I remember thinking this car has no weight to it. I was very nervous. I always felt like I might fly off the road. So the difference in the quality of the vehicles today is just, it has transformed where we're going to go with EVs. So the excitement in watching it go from a very small light vehicle that people were concerned about, is this safe? What's going to happen when I'm in an accident? Now, I actually see this transformation happening where people aren't even going to realize that they're moving into an alternative fuel or hybrid type vehicle. Every vehicle is just moving that way. So they're going to be used to driving, for example, a Honda CR-V and just easily move into a hybrid and then a plug-in and a fully electric vehicle. So it has become mass market. It has become mainstream. There are no longer issues around safety, around weight. And then, of course, the charging infrastructure piece has been an important aspect, so that takes that range anxiety off the table as we continue to grow our infrastructure. So from a product perspective, I am super excited about where I see EVs right now. And when we look over the next 18 months, the products coming are beyond what I think consumers even realize.
Britta, what about you?
I think that, okay, so I was along for the whole ride in the 2015, 16, 17, 2005, 6, 7 timeframe when the Volt, for example, was just on the back of a napkin. And so I think, when I think about back then, that I was even just before that time, I had borrowed we had an old EV1 hanging around GM's facilities up there, just lingering somewhere. And I said, you know what, can I drive that thing for a week and get a feeling for what range anxiety is? What does that mean? Like, I'm in a car that doesn't go 300 miles, 400 miles. What does that feel like? And it was, I borrowed it for a week just to have that understanding, both for the hydrogen fuel cell program, but also particularly for the battery program. And it was interesting. Obviously, we've made a lot of progress since those days. A plug-in hybrid, of course, doesn't ever have the feeling of range anxiety. Although you have gas anxiety, you never want to go onto the gas side of those vehicles. And that becomes the game you play, is just never convert, turning over to the gas side. So I do know what that feeling is too. I'd say in the beginning too, we were anxious. We over-designed that vehicle, every part of the batteries. We wanted it to be a success. We didn't want there to be any concern about the durability of those batteries. And there's always a question: what happens when you get out of a lab and you really your customers start putting on these miles in Alaska and in Florida and Arizona, where it's really hot? And the data has just proven over and over again for these last 10 years, they're just way over-designed. They're very solid. There have never been any big battery issues. The batteries are way overperforming because they're being pampered in those designs. And so I think those are the final thing was infrastructure. Just wondering, concerned that I would need a lot more public infrastructure, a lot of level 2 or DC fast charging. And in the end, I almost never use it. I might use it to sort of make sure that people who've gone to the trouble of putting it in see that there are users out there, especially if I'm across town and I don't want to get back on gas. So I think that has become noticeably reduced, an issue in my mind. And even with the battery electric vehicle, all the data says that 80 to 90% of your charging is always done at home, maybe at work. Almost nothing's done in the public space. You need it for perception. We need it to sell these vehicles. But in the end, if you've got a place at home or at work to plug this car reliably in every night, it's a non-issue.
That's great. And Jane, for someone who is more recently, having electric mobility as a part of their lives, what's been your change in impression?
What I can say is that definitely, as you say, it's still in its infancy here. In fact, I remember when the executive director for UNEP, joined maybe 10 years ago, wanted to buy an electric car, but we couldn't get an electric car because there's no, dealer that was willing to, for the service was willing to sell an electric car. But now we do have. So that, we're seeing quite a big progression. The numbers are really increasing where countries, have embraced this technology. We're seeing quite huge numbers. And again, what is encouraging is that the private sector is leading. If you look at a lot of the countries, it's the private sector that is leading. The government is, still lagging behind. They're trying to run, to catch up, but very exciting times. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all for that. Given that March is Women's History Month, we have to ask, what is the role of women in accelerating transportation electrification? Liza, do you want to start?
I'll just mention 2 quick things from the retail side. First, all the data shows that women influence over 85% of the purchase decisions and actually physically purchase over 60%. I think we're somewhere in the mid-60s of all vehicles in the United States. I don't know about Africa, but I do know in the US that those statistics are real. And so, but I also, from both subjectively and some data that we've read, women do put a little bit more practicality in making their vehicle decision. And I think we've had 2 things that have caused us to have a slower adoption of EVs, especially with women. First, the types of vehicles that have been available historically have not necessarily fit the lifestyle of many women, whether it be family friendly or just needing a larger vehicle to live life. I think that's been a challenge that is being addressed right now and is not going to be an issue after 2021. And then secondly, I think that as women were looking for data to be able to make sure it supported making a purchase decision on EV, we just didn't have enough on the roads to provide data, but that's gone too. So while we might look historically and say women haven't been I think it was 30% was the number of EVs were being purchased by women. I believe that 2021 is the year that that starts pivoting and changing in a very significant way.
Thank you. Jane, how about you in your world and purview, what's the role of women?
As I said, we're still at infancy, so definitely, with the correct messaging, we could tap, to more women actually shifting to electric mobility. I know that, in Africa, a lot of the women, before buying a car, they look at, the financial implications, the cost implications, economic analysis, and the EV makes sense. And definitely we will see more women actually moving towards EV, because if you look around, a lot of the women are buying smaller compact cars because of this kind of economics. So we need to have targeted messaging. And then of course, from the business angle, it's important to include women into the business angle of it. In battery swapping, in charging, in, the 2-3 wheelers of public transport. So that's the role of the women that I see.
And Britta, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Liza's answer was just spot on for me. I walk around with the same data points in my head. Women are so accountable for many of the purchase decisions, but I think the models are going to matter a lot. I think that women are busy, and I think that women don't have a lot of time to research new technologies, what's perceived as a new technology. I think that we have to nail infrastructure. I think that when we get enough infrastructure out there, if President Biden comes through with 500,000 chargers on the road, hopefully many, many DC fast chargers, I think then that just gets checked off the list of things I have to consider. And I'm just not so sure about it. And I have to think of my family first. And so I think that there are a lot of things that women think about. It is not just it's just not a personal decision. It is a family or extended family consideration. And I think we just have to make those things go away with infrastructure, bring down the cost, get more models out there. And then I think it becomes the easy decision. I think as soon as we make this the easy decision, game over, women are in, it's the right answer for your family. And again, because you can start these cars in the middle of a hot summer day or a cold winter morning and start the car in your engine. There's no tailpipe exhaust, and warm up the passenger cabin, and then unplug and drive the car away. You have no exhaust fumes to worry about in your garage. So these are really, really women friendly vehicles.
Love that. I mean, it's interesting thinking about some of the barriers, and you talking about the product maybe not necessarily being yet, but we're evolving in that direction. Are there other barriers to women going electric that we didn't cover? Is the advertising or education or experience with the products not there? How can we get more women to consider EVs? Anything else to add there?
Go ahead,
sorry,
Britta.
go ahead, Liza.
You please go, Britta.
Well, I'm just thinking, I happen in my spare time, I sit on the Orlando's water and electric utility board. And I just happened to see this morning that we're again announcing we give $50 to dealers as rebates to folks that come in and do a test drive of an EV. And,
Wow.
and I just, these kinds of ideas to sort of encourage, just raise awareness, tempt you with just get in this car to see what we're talking about. They're crazy, better to drive, smoother, the ride and handling's better, the acceleration's much nicer, and it's quiet. If you hate the kitchen fan, the fan on your stove, you're gonna love EVs. And so I think that those kinds of programs are really, really important, just for starters.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. It is all about getting people in the vehicles and allowing them to experience it. So at one of our Nissan dealerships, we have 5 Nissan Leafs that we just have available for service customers every day. So when they come in their Nissan Rogue or in a Sentra, we say, can we please give you the opportunity to drive this Leaf for the day? We would love for you just to experience it. And so the more people that we can get in the vehicles, that's when the conversion starts happening. So we just, as Britta just said, we've got to keep getting people in the vehicles, get them to drive them, get them to experience them, and then it's a game changer.
Amazing. Jane, anything to add? Yeah.
Let me just throw out one more quick idea, because this has to do with Jane too. I think we were talking about this on the pre-call, making them more affordable. that's also going to make a huge difference, because as we get more new EVs on the road, we start getting that 2 and 3 year old EV that comes in as a pre-owned, and then that brings down that average cost and opens it up to so many more people. So it's not just about getting them in there, we also have to make them affordable, and that's something that is coming more, but we're not there yet.
Yes, just to add on to what Lisa has said, definitely, we need the correct messaging, training, because, things, we still have anxiety challenges, here in Africa. Charging, I don't think we have a private charging station still in Kenya, but definitely a lot of people, when you tell them, yes, you can charge in your home, really? And you need to charge all the time, so those are the kinds of simple messaging that need to go out. And definitely, as Lisa said, the cost element, just to compare the cost to show that it's actually affordable when you look at the life, the full life of running an EV vehicle. You don't have a lot of, you don't have the servicing that is required and all those things, it makes sense. So those are the kind of messaging that I think that need to really come out, and how women, I think it would really endear more to women, because, it's easy to run and to operate. Yeah.
Can I add something here? I want to respond
Please.
to a question that Trenton is putting in the questions, because it's spot on. EVs are empowering for women. This idea of going to a gas station late on a Friday night because you need to fill up the tank for Saturday morning, and you don't feel safe with the poor lighting at the gas station, and it's sort of at the whim of it's not your time. You got to go when they're open and so on. It's just a very negative experience for women and for men as well. And this idea of just plugging it at home, just like you do your cell phone, just whenever it's sitting around, plug it in, charge it up, ready to go for the next round, is an incredibly clean, convenient, and safe experience. So I think, Trenton, you hit the nail on the head. Why don't manufacturers tout that? Often they don't want to call attention to the areas where there are some negatives on either the gas side for the time being, or otherwise. And maybe women, I don't think women are really responding to that. We're not sure what the messages are that women need to hear. I think the butts in seats is actually the number one thing we need to do with women. Get them in these cars.
I mean, that's to that point, there was a recent JD Power study that showed, like, just riding in one, not even driving an EV, just riding it, you're 3 times more likely to consider it. It's such a transforming experience. Totally agree.
And Stuart, there's a question by Charles on, countries that are encouraging, how do we encourage EV in countries that have, already problems with the reliable electricity supply? But what we find is that, for example, in Kenya, where, the electricity supply during daytime, when, the demand's up at peak, it's almost at par, but at night, there's a lot of, there's excess power. And actually, we are trying to collaborate with the utility company to see how, we can utilize nighttime charging and such. And they're really very interested in this. Thank you.
That's great. I'll flag, just as a female EV owner, that while I do love the ability to charge at home, that is huge. There are people who don't have access to charging at home. And so I hope, as Biden and states expand EV charging infrastructure, that we're being thoughtful in where we put those EV chargers, because some of them are haphazardly stuck behind the grocery store in the dark. To Britta's earlier point, not really the safest environment, where, like, women feel like, yeah, that's a good idea. That's not the end of a horror movie for me. So I hope we're really thoughtful as how we install them. And I think a great way to be thoughtful is to encourage more women to take place in this sector and be the decision makers on where the EV chargers are being installed, for instance. So that's our next question. How can we recruit more women into this sector, and why is it important that we do so? It's not just because we need to have more female representation, but because they bring unique perspectives. And so, I'd love to start with Jane, actually, and then we'll go from there on how we get more women in this space.
How do we get more women into this space? I think it's it's a messaging. How do we get the correct message out? How do we target women? And especially how do we identify what the niche is, for the various sectors, or, we see that there's a lot of women who are interested, maybe, in charging, as I talked about, in some of the public transport ownership. So how do we target this kind of messaging to women, and definitely making it as simple as possible to show that it is really, really easy to operate, to run an EV, and it's cost effective. Thanks.
Liza, you want to go next?
Sure, I will speak from the area that I represent, which is the retail automotive industry. And we are always looking to bring women into this industry. And I think the pivot to electrification and the growth of this part of our industry is the perfect opportunity for us to be able to share the message with more women as to why this is a great career path. And what I always tell anybody I'm talking to in our community or potential new hires for our company is that, years ago, I think the industry attracted people who loved cars, and they looked at it as someone who was either mechanically inclined or loved the vehicle. But what we're in right now is the people business. And the mission at our company is to move lives forward for our customers, for our associates, and for our community. And when women start looking at the auto industry as a place where they can have significant impact on the people that they connect with every day and helping them make really good transportation decisions now, not only for their family, but good transportation decisions on how they impact the world, how they impact the environment and the communities they live in, that is going to attract, and it's a story we've got to be telling more women, is that this is an industry where they can really be proud to be a part of, that they're impacting people's lives, and they're really giving back to the community they live in and the world that we are all a part of. So I think that is what we need to be doing. We need to be sharing the story. We need to get that messaging out there. It's not about just a love for cars. It's about the difference we can make.
Love that. Britta?
It's hard to top those answers. So, and we're not here competing. We're just trying to get really good information out there. So I'm not going to compete. But that, again, those are really important comments. I would just say that because this is the future. Transportation is changing and energy is changing. The whole planet is going through a revolution. And these jobs are going to be with us for the next 50, 100 years. It's what other place would you want to be? What other career can you imagine where you get to do it right the next time? You can put something out there that just seems to be a win-win-win for everyone. It's a win for renewables. It's a win for health and air quality. It's a win for climate. It's a win for better transportation, smoother rides, better vehicle solutions, technology solutions. I just think for those reasons, and then what women bring to the table, really system thinkers. I've always felt that women are particularly good at being a system thinker. Maybe it's because of the way we think about community or family, and it's just always beyond the self. That thinking, this diversity of thought and what you bring to the table is really, really powerful. And I love the idea of women flocking over to the dealership networks to help with this transition. I think that would be a spectacular add to that community. But even in the automotive world, trucking world, or also in the utility space, the jobs right now, the opportunity to get in there and make a difference, significant career path for everyone getting involved.
That's great. That's super inspiring. We're shifting some now to the audience questions. Liza, this one's for you. How have you been able to encourage other car dealers to support the transition to electric vehicles? Are certain dealers hesitant to do that, and how have you convinced them that that's the future and they should get on board?
Stuart, it's a great question. There were several. I was just looking at some of the Q&A over there, and there were quite a few questions about how do we make sure that the dealership experience, that people at the dealerships are prepared for EV buyers to come in, that we're not having those vehicles stuck on the back lot, not charged up. And then how do we make sure that all dealers are moving in this direction? And I can't speak for all dealers, because there are going to be some, and there are some who are dragging their feet. But I will tell you that the conversation that has shifted in the last 12 months, for example, in the Virginia Auto Dealers Association, has been significant. And I do believe that a large portion of dealers really in this past year are seeing, again, they have to be a part of the solution or they are the problem. Our manufacturers are requiring us to invest in some ways where they're going to either have to choose, I'm going to continue to be a Cadillac dealer or I'm not. And that was the decision we were given in this last 12 months. And there were dealers who said, I'm out. And they gave up their franchise. And then those of us who said, I'm in, we're going to invest significant dollars saying we believe that electrification is the future of that brand. So I think some of it will be self-selection. I also believe that dealers, what has held us back the most is a 30-day mindset. Our manufacturers put these numbers on us that we're supposed to hit within a certain 30-day period, and we are so short-sighted. And so we've been talking a lot in large industry groups about the fact that the only way we're going to continue to be a part of the solution for transportation is we've got to do what Simon Sinek says and be a part of the infinite game. And we got to be looking more long-term. And so I'm seeing that happening. In some cases, it's faster than others. And the last comment I'll make is that it's also very market dependent. In the markets where there's more consumer demand, I'm seeing dealers' mindset shift. In some of the more rural markets, that's a harder sell because they're not seeing any consumer demand. They're not seeing any on the road. And so they're having a harder time moving forward.
That's great. Thank you.
It's really interesting. This next question, I'm actually going to pitch it to both Jane and Britta because I think you both have a unique set of perspectives. So we've got a question about congestion from cars on the road. As we all know, tackling transportation electrification, tackling climate change is not just about making every single vehicle that's on the road right now electric. It's also about reducing vehicle miles traveled, making sure public transit plays a role. And Jane, I'll start with you because as you mentioned, you're really at this tipping point where car ownership is accelerating in your regions. And so in your work, how do you make sure that vehicle electrification isn't making the congestion issue worse? Or you're starting off on the best foot instead of just simply flooding the system with new EVs?
Thank you. What I can say is that we definitely look at transportation in a holistic manner. So we do encourage, walking and cycling if it's short distances, use of public transport. And I like what Britta talked about earlier, that, when you're talking about electrification, you're talking about also including electric buses. So that's also a program that we are targeting in several of the African countries, how to move from the highly pollutive, Euro 0 buses into electric buses. So we are looking at the whole spectrum. Definitely, yes, traffic is a big problem in a lot of the African cities, but because of the road network is not developed. And as I mentioned, vehicle population is still very low. I think if you look at a country like Ethiopia, you're talking about less than 10 vehicles per 1,000 people. In the US, I know it's about 800. In the Europe, it's over 500. So vehicle population will increase. So how do we target cleaner mobility, but also put in place a system so that people shorter distances, they have opportunities, they have options. There's issues of shared drive and such, but cleaner mobility. Thanks.
And I would, well, let me add to this. We can't just do it by electrifying our way out of this. We are not going to address all the carbon emissions required. So what I didn't mention when I said that by 2030, just to get on a pathway to trying to contain temperatures to 1.5 degree increase, I mentioned 70 million electric vehicles in just in the United States, but it also goes hand in hand with a 20% reduction in vehicle miles traveled. And again, if you look at both numbers, I don't know how to get either number. I don't know how to get 70 million electric vehicles on the road, except to do every kind of panel like this, get out there, do these large scale programs, work with industry business. It's the stuff that I do every day. I also don't know how to get a 20% reduction in VMT. That means buses, and we are working on a lot of bus electrification programs and so on, getting people into buses, out of cars. It's electric bikes, get them out of cars and into bikes. It's micromobility, it's the walking and the biking, making cities safer. So if we can do more on VMT, we can do a little bit less on vehicle electrification. If we can't make those, it all comes from somewhere, these carbon emission reductions and air, and even pollutant emission reductions that we're trying to target. So they do go hand in hand, and I don't mean to ever minimize the other one. We have to have them both, or we're going to have to do more than 70 million electric vehicles on the road to eliminate those emissions.
That's really, really insightful. Thank you
Love
to
that.
both of you.
What, and this is for all of you all, what makes you excited about this space? I mean, you've referenced it, a few elements, but you know, why are you excited about the future of electric vehicles?
Liza, do you want to start?
I think there's a lot that excites me, but I think the one point I'd want to focus on is I do believe that is going to attract a new level of talent and a diverse level of ideas to our industry that we haven't seen before. I believe that it's going to bring people who are excited about bigger topics, whether it be our environment and climate change and new technology, and not just the people who've been in our industry a long time. So I think attracting new people is the most important thing that excites me, because it's what wakes me up every day as we have more people join automotive and figure out how they can change lives.
Love that. Jane, what excites you about the future for electric vehicles?
What excites me is the opportunities, you know, and the options that are available when you talk about electric mobility, how to combine it with renewable energies, what are the benefits. So it is a win-win for everybody. And what's also exciting is that a lot of the younger people as well, you know, both men and women, are very, very interested and very keen in electric mobility. About actually early this month, we did launch an electric two-wheeler program in Kenya. And it's interesting that in the room, we had about 50 startup companies that are looking at how to create, how to build, assemble, the three-wheeler electric motorcycles. So quite interesting and, very keen interest. And of course, definitely, this is, the future, how we're going.
Britta, how about you?
Yeah, so you can tell I'm not very passionate about this subject anyway. No, I tell you what, we're riding a high right now, right? I've been in this since 2004 on the hydrogen program. And of course, it got totally overcome by the battery progress. And I don't ever want to take hydrogen off the table. I actually think it will play a role, soon in some of the more difficult to solve battery vehicles like long haul trucking. But I've never seen a moment in time that feels like it is now going to happen for sure. It used to be a couple automakers and a couple dealerships and a couple utilities and not even very many private fleets. Now, all of a sudden, when I just sort of read down my list of what's happened in, I'm just going to say the last 6 months, really the last, 2 months, but in the last year, we're seeing California and Massachusetts announcing that by 2035, they want to see only EV sales. And New Jersey's talking about it. We've got General Motors announcing that they aim to sell only electric vehicles after 2035. You've got fleets like Amazon, FedEx, UPS, Anheuser-Busch, Walmart, on and on the list goes, saying they're going to electrify. Uber and Lyft in the United States, they've said that by 2030, they aim to electrify all their vehicles. You look at the banking community, follow the money. The banking community, look at the big asset managers around the world, BlackRock, State Street, all these guys that invest trillions and billions of dollars. They are now working with companies to make sure that they have climate aligned programs and products. And if they don't, they say they're going to get out of those investments. If your money is at risk because you are doing something that is causing more trouble than actually getting us on a 1.5 degree C path, that's going to stop. And so that is a really big indicator that the world is changing. So where I'm sitting right now and the administration announcements right now and just the alignment of utilities and automakers, fantastic moment in time to see this tipping point happening.
Super inspiring.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So for our very last question, as we've only got a few minutes left, we're going to try to leave on a high note, although this whole conversation has been a high note as far as I'm concerned. But, Britta, I think we'll start with you. What advice would you give to women seeking a career in advanced transportation? And not just young women, but even women who are potentially pivoting. or are leaving another industry and coming into this sector. So women from all stages of their career, what advice would you give them?
I'm gonna steal from Liza, and I'm first gonna say you do not have to be a car lover. Okay, you don't have to love cars or love power lines in your backyard. There are so many careers and job areas within the utility industry, transportation, the nonprofits, government that are looking at transportation and energy solutions as a whole system. I would say to women, there is something for you. Just put your system thinking cap on. You know, think about sort of how these issues come together. Transportation, energy, health, equity, family, they all come together in these sort of these career choices that you can make right now. And I would maybe finally add, don't be afraid to show your passion for what you do. Your career can be filled with passion. And I think that's what you could find in this area.
Love that. Jane, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you. Just to add on to what Britta has said, definitely there are, very many areas that women can participate. In many of, when I look around, women are underrepresented in many areas, and they have, a niche. I've been actually yesterday I was watching some news on TV, and they've really been. There's one of the local dealers who's been advertising, using a lady who was trained as a mechanic, because a lot of people want to go to that lady as a mechanic. So what we find is that women have a niche. There are many areas, whatever passion you have, there are many opportunities that women need to identify, follow their interests, but the field is vast and definitely very exciting opportunities.
Liza, last thoughts?
This past year has really shown how some industries have been able to thrive and others have been extremely challenged. Hospitality, retail, service industries. There are a lot of women that have been incredibly successful in those spaces who would be a natural fit to move into transportation in today's world, as they're kind of working through how COVID has impacted us all. And I think exactly what Jane and Britta said, there are so many different opportunities. I would encourage, there was a question over here about women in the technical side, the mechanic side, and Jane touched on that. The difference in pretty much almost all men who have been on the mechanical side, especially in dealerships, changing from internal combustion engines into electric vehicles. We need to encourage, starting really at the age of middle school, young girls who are excited about science and engineering. They need to understand the opportunities in automotive and how different it looks today than maybe when their father or grandfather were in the space. We also need more women in the area of shaping the future product. We talked today about maybe one of the reasons that EVs haven't been adopted as quickly with women was the type of EVs that were the early EVs. And I think that there's going to be other alternative fuel options that are going to come forward in the next 5, 10, 20 years. I think EVs are going to be an important part, but I think there's technology out there that we haven't even heard of yet. And we need young women. We need as many young women as we have young men helping us bring these solutions to the table so that we have the best transportation solutions 20 years from now to get where we want to go in life. So we need to proactively reach out to young women, women of all ages, share these stories. Let's all be voices for the future of transportation. And we've got to encourage, because when we look at the number of women who actually apply for these positions, it's very small. If we're proactive about it, that's where we grow women in automotive.
That's great. You guys have been great panelists. Can't thank you enough, Liza, Jane, Britta. Thank you so much for joining us. We're at 11 o'clock, so just want to say thank you to you all. Thank you for everyone that joined. We will post the recording of this event, so check out generation180.org if you have any follow-up questions or want to reach out or learn more about us or the panelists today. And while you're at generation180.org, sign the Going Electric Pledge to make your next vehicle electric. Let's do this. So thanks everyone. Really good to see y'all, and let's keep in touch.